So usually when you read one of Jesus' parables, there's a hook in it. There's a thing. There's a twist, something that makes you go, what? But this one is kind of straightforward. It seems to be right there on the surface, doesn't it? You get the proud guy standing up, bragging about who he is, and then you get the humble guy who recognizes his relationship, his position before God, and Jesus ends it saying that the humble will be exalted, the exalted will be humbled, and a parable. But I'd like to dig into it a little bit with you, if I could. And to do this, I want you to go with me all the way back to the beginning of things. I want you to go back to that beautiful creation poem in the first chapter of Genesis. And in this poem, as it unfolds and reveals God's creative acts with verses, it begins each verse with "and God said," and then each ends with "and God saw that it was good." And God said, "Let there be." And it was. And God saw that it was good. And that happens over and over again. And God said, let there be light. And it was good. And let there be land. And it was good. And let there be birds and fish. And it was good. And let us make humankind in our image. And so in the image of God, He created them, male and female. God created them and saw that it was good. That word good in Hebrew is tov. Say that, tov. Tov. It's a very short word, very small word, and it may not mean what you think it means. And when we hear the word good, we may think of it in terms of a moral capacity, like that's a good person, right? But it's more in terms of function, really. That person did a good job is different than saying that is a good person, isn't it? Besides, you can't really have a morally good stone. God makes earth and says, here is a good stone. Is that stone morally good? It's good for being a stone. When God makes these things, He makes them according to the purpose that they have in service of the rest of creation. And so when God is looking at that which He has made, He says, this is good. This is going to do what I've set it up to do. The land is good for growing food, for providing shelter, for pushing up mountains, for holding back lakes. Birds and fish are good for inhabiting spaces that we cannot, and stirring our imaginations up to fly or to float or to dive or to swim. And all are good for its purpose, and so it is with humanity. We are good for our purpose, for the reason that God created us. We are good to care for the world and to care for each other. The word has no moral meaning. We are as good for our intended purpose as a stone is for its intended purpose. One is not better than the other. And in this parable that Jesus tells, the tax collector understands this. As he prays to God, his mind is on how unlike God he is and on how he has failed to do that which God has created him to do. God created him to take care of the world and to take care of each other, and he's just not doing it. And he's praying for God's forgiveness for him. I think that if he were to hear Paul preach, if the tax collector ever heard Paul preach that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, he would say, yes, that's me. And if you heard Paul say that the wages of sin is death, he would say, I deserve that because I've failed so badly. And if he heard Paul say that we are saved by grace, he would erupt in praise for God's great gift. Those words would resonate to his very soul and would spring up in him a profound joy in the one who died for sinners such as us. The tax collector knows he's a sinner, knows that he is totally depraved, dead in his sins, and without hope in this world or the next, if not for the grace of God given to him. The tax collector's in a tough spot. The very nature of his job encourages him to not care for other people and to not care for the world. It even rewards him for his failure to do as God commands. He doesn't get paid by the hour to collect taxes. He only makes money if he can squeeze out more than what is owed. His very livelihood depends on him lying, depends on him applying undue pressure, threatening violence or imprisonment, keeping people in debt. I imagine, given how fervently he's praying, he would rather get out of this racket if he could, because he knows that this is not how you care for people. This is not how you care for creation. The Pharisee doesn't seem to understand what the word good means. He thinks it means something moral. If you read it closely, you'll see his prayer isn't focusing on God at all, is it? It's on how much better he is than everyone else, and it's got to be because he fasts twice a week and because he tithes a tenth of his income, and he doesn't even see that fasting for him is a choice. It's chosen hunger. When the people that he's supposed to be serving are hungry not of their own will. He doesn't see that tithing is a privilege of the rich, and to demand it of the poor keeps them even more poor. And there's another thing that we would miss if we weren't paying attention in this parable. And that is the relationship between the Pharisee and the tax collector. They may not know each other's names, but they are connected. You see, the Pharisee gets his money from the tax collector who collects the temple tax. The Pharisee gets his money that makes him so comfortable because this guy has to do his job of collecting taxes both for Rome and for the temple. And it's the temple tax that supplies for the Pharisee. So the Pharisee is getting all the money and not paying any attention to what that collection process is doing to his community. He's only focused on himself. He doesn't see how that collection process, we've called it an economy of extraction before. He doesn't see how that economy of extraction is putting people into desperate positions, the very ones that he's comparing himself against, saying that he's better than. And he has no clue that he is part and parcel of a system that creates these problems. Well, maybe he doesn't want to see it. Maybe he doesn't want to acknowledge that his privilege drives oppression. He's so deep into this system, he's forgotten that the command of God is to care for this world and care for each other. He's turned it into some kind of a contest that he thinks he's winning. This economy of extraction where the privileged live oblivious to the impact of their lifestyle on people downstream of them creates a kind of pressure that pushes people into competition for resources. It causes them to work harder and to work longer because they're trying to make it on their own while there are people who are just taking from them along the way. It forces people to abuse resources. It forces people to abuse neighbors. It's an economy that runs completely counter to God's command to care for the world and care for each other. This economy of extraction in this parable is realized where the privileged Pharisee has deluded himself into thinking that he's better than everyone else because he fasts and tithes, while the tax collector is stuck sucking the livelihood from the very families that propped this Pharisee up. He's so deluded that I imagine that if he ever heard Paul preach, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. If he ever heard Paul say that the wages of sin is death, and that we're saved by grace, which is the very gift of God, that he'd look out at the congregation and say, y'all better listen up because he's talking to you. Talk about total depravity. But you know, that Pharisee is as much in need of the saving grace of God as anyone else is. He may not be able to recognize his position before God as that of a sinner. But we know that he is a sinner, don't we? We know that all have sinned and fallen short, right? We know that we are saved by grace, not by works, right? As people who bear the image of God, we're called to care for this world and for each other, right? May the Lord humble those who exalt themselves and exalt those who are humbled. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.